We are continuing this morning through our series in the book of Ephesians, which I presented to you in the beginning as kind of a syllabus for life. Like this is, you want to know how a course is going to go, where it's going to go, the kind of things that you need to know to be successful in it. Paul says, hey, in this letter that I'm writing, that he wrote to the church at Ephesus, I'm telling you there is a plan for the universe. There's something that's happening that God has been doing for a very long time that he revealed to Paul, and Paul reveals to us. And the plan is this. He said it was a mystery, but now we know. Here's the plan. That God is bringing everything back together. Everything in heaven and on earth united under the authority of Christ. We're putting things back together. And it all begins with relationships. He says, we're putting things back together, and it's going to begin with a restored relationship with God. That we're being united with God through Christ. And by this union that God makes possible through Jesus' blood shed for the forgiveness of our sins on the cross, he's going to work out everything according to this plan, but it begins with our hearts being filled with the life of God by the Spirit of God, with Christ literally making his home in our hearts. He says in his prayer in Ephesians chapter 3. And once you restore this relationship with God, once we're reconnected with him, then other things, other relationships start to come back together. It all fell apart with separation from God. It's all being put back together through union with God. So it leads over then to our relationships with others. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4, be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults. Because, hey, if you're going to put these relationships back together, you're going to have to put up with each other a little bit because it's going to take some time and it's going to take some work. Make allowance for each other's faults because of your love. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. And when we do that, when we're united with God, reconnected with him, and we start to reconnect with others, that is what the church is. It is people who are connected with each other through Christ, restored in a relationship. And then as we see this plan that's unfolding, and now we're being reconnected with each other, he says, it kind of comes down to this. He sums up, you can sum up the rest of Ephesians with these words. How's it going to happen? How's it going to work? Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. To do this, to restore these relationships, you're going to have to take off some relationship killers. The things that just destroy relationships, things that tear us apart. Things like lying, right? Relationship killer. You lie, like people find out you're lying, they don't trust you anymore, relationships don't work very well. Anger, like you fly off the handle, breaks up relationships. Being a taker, being someone who's always taking from others, never giving back, one-sided relationships, relationship killer. Trash talking, might be great in the NBA, might be great in the football field. I don't like it there either, but relationships, no go, doesn't work. Seeking revenge, trying to get back, right? When people hurt you, you hurt them. Relationship killer. Take those things off, Paul says. Put on relationship healers. Truth. Not just like hardcore, out of the gate, speak the truth, he says, in love. Peace. Be a peacemaker, not just a peacekeeper, someone who makes peace with other people. Encouragement. Instead of tearing people down with your words, build people up with your words. Forgiveness. Can't have relationships with human beings without forgiveness because we're all broken. We all hurt each other. We have to forgive each other. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then he starts going into some real specific relationships. Last week we looked at his marriage plan. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Submit to them not for who they are, because of submit in the way that you submit to the Lord, submit to them. Husbands, love your wives, not because they're always lovely. Love them as Christ loved the church. He says this marriage plan is showing you something about how God loves us, how God relates to us, and how he wants us to relate to him. You see it in a marriage, and it's pointing us to God, the marriage plan. This week, we come to the family plan. The family plan. So I asked our kids, they're going to go upstairs for their children's worship in a minute, but I asked them to hang around for a minute. Could you guys, can all the children come up forward, please? Can you guys, all the children come up? Just like, maybe sit right here in front of my children, right? Sit right over here. Perfect. Great. All right. So we have the children in the front right up here. I wonder how the rest of you came into the world. Are not all of you children of someone? Just saying. Paul says to children, you ready for this? Drum roll. He says, children, obey your parents. Wow. I did not see that coming. Children, obey your parents because you belong to the Lord, for this is the right thing to do. Now, at first glance, this isn't eye-popping, right? If you know the 10 Commandments, like one of the 10 Commandments was honor your father and your mother. So it's not surprising that Paul would say to children, hey, obey your parents. But if you look closer at it, there's actually some things that are actually quite surprising in here. He says, children, obey your parents. And this was a letter that was written to the church, and it was probably written to the church and read in the church. And Paul says, children, obey your parents, which is to assume what? That they were actually there. That when the church was meeting together, that children were a part of that meeting. Now, in the first century, children were not even to be seen, let alone heard, right? If you had a meeting of adults, and it's like a church kind of meeting, children would have been someplace else, not even included. So when he says, children, obey your parents, he's saying, he's talking to the children who are actually right there with him. He's saying, hey guys, you are included in the family. You are a part of it. I'm talking to you here because you are here. Jesus said, let the children come. The church was letting the children come, not sending them off to hide in the corner, including them. He says, children, obey your parents because he says, you belong to the Lord. You don't just belong to your parents. You actually belong to God. He's yours. And he's saying, obey them because you belong to him. And he says, obey them because you have a part to play in this family. You have a role. We used to always say when I was in youth ministry, the kids are the future of the church. He says, you're not the future of the church. You're the church today. You're a part of this family of faith. Right now, right where you are, whatever age you are, you belong to God and you belong to the family of God. And as parts of the family, you have something to contribute to the family. And then he gives the reason to obey, right? This is important. The reason you need to obey your parents is not because they're a 3-time parent of the year and 6-time runner-ups. He doesn't say obey them because they're great parents. He doesn't say obey them because they brought you into the world and they can take you out. Which is why my parents told me to obey them. No, actually, they didn't, but I've heard people say that. He doesn't even say obey your parents because God said so. He says obey your parents because you belong to the Lord. And because you belong to the Lord, it's the right thing to do. Not because you belong to them, because you belong to him. he uses these words, because it's the right thing to do, according to your plan, as to the Lord, out of reverence for Christ. All these things that we're doing, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. All the relationships he's not saying treat people the way they deserve to be treated in the moment. He's saying treat them the way that you would treat me. Respond to them the way that you would respond to me. If God is sitting right, love them, follow them, listen to them, obey them, because you belong to God, and they belong to God, and I belong to God. And we're all going to treat each other not the way that we deserve to be treated, the way that God treats us. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with the promise. If you honor your father and mother, things will go well for you, and you will have a long life on earth. Honor. Honoring our parents requires different things of us at different stages of our life. But in that first stage of our life, when we're kids, it means obey your parents. Because there are things that they know about the world and about life and about what's safe and about what's unsafe that we don't know yet when we're young, when we haven't grown up, when we haven't had those experiences. He says, obey them when you're young so that your life may be long. I frankly think it's amazing that anybody lives to be 21. Like with all the dangers and perils that exist in the world, it's like when you're like, it's like don't run into the street because you don't know this, but those cars that come by, they will kind of like do really, really bad damage to you. So don't do that. Don't touch the hot stove because it'll burn you. And the older we get, the more important things become and the more dangerous and the less control our parents have. Obey them when we're young. As we grow older, right? We honor our parents with our gratitude for the ways that they help us, for the things that they provide for us, for the ways that they take care of us, for the things that they teach us. We honor our parents with our respect. We honor our parents with our forgiveness. Because they're not perfect. Because sometimes they mess up, and when they do, it matters. It's like we're not saying it didn't matter, we're not saying it's not important. This becomes even more important. The older we get, the more we discover our parents were not perfect. Sometimes we end up in a therapist's office and we find out even more about how imperfect they were. We have to forgive because they weren't perfect. Because if we don't forgive, we sever the relationship. We're broken from them. If we don't forgive our parents, I'm talking to the older children in the house now, if we don't forgive our parents, we will honor them by becoming like them. We will honor them. Or we will honor them by rejecting what we don't like about them. And when we do that, when we're just reacting against the negative things, we're actually still allowing our parents to control our lives. We're just doing what they said not to do instead of doing what they said to do. Forgiveness restores relationships. The first relationship addressed when Jesus is coming into the world was given to John the Baptist's dad. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of children to their father. We forgive, we restore relationships. We honor our parents when they get older by caring for them, when they can not take care of themselves anymore. Many of us have been through and are in that stage of life. We honor them by caring for them. Children, obey your parents because you belong to the Lord. Any questions? Cool. You guys can go now. Thank you. Give him a hand. Parents. No, I don't. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. I got to be honest. This is like one of my least favorite directives in the Bible. You know why? 2 reasons. Because, first of all, it's so easy to do. I mean, I don't think there's anything easier than for a father to exasperate their child, and it's so much fun. I mean, it's easy, and it's like this natural gift that we've been given that enables us to exasperate them with almost no effort whatsoever. Now, generally, I don't like to do too much about saying, well, in the Greek or in the Hebrew it says this, because it might have this effect of making, well, I can't really understand the Bible because I can't read Greek, and that's what it was written through. But sometimes, and this is one of those, it really is helpful to go back to the language in this one for my sake. And generally, our translations are very reliable. But when I think of exasperate, I think of the word annoy, and it's actually more than just annoy. The real meaning of the word that's used here is to provoke to anger, which means I can still annoy them as long as I don't take it so far that I'm provoking them to anger. And I'm sure it's a fine line sometimes, and you have to be really careful about it, but I think it's worth the risk, right? Do not provoke them to anger. Why would a father need such a directive? Why would a father need to be told, do not provoke your children to anger? I think there are some good reasons and some bad reasons. Part of being a parent is this, right? We have seen things that our kids haven't seen. We know things that they don't know. We want to protect them from the dangers, spare them the pain of our mistakes, right? I don't want my kids to have to learn everything the way that I learned them. I know that there's a school of hard knocks, but I'm kind of in the mind that whenever I can learn something without a hard knock, I would like to do that. And whenever I can teach my kids something without having them having to experience a hard knock, I would like to have that. And sometimes our desire, out of that desire to protect them and to help them and be well-intentioned in our motives, but we can be misguided, misunderstood in our applications. We're prone to exasperating, annoying our children because sometimes we just don't adjust quickly enough, moms and dads, to the growth in their lives. It's like, does it feel like any other parent? Like one day you're wiping their bottom, and the next day you're tying their shoes, and the next day they're like going off to school, and then all of a sudden, like, they're wiping you up on the basketball court, and it's like, how did this happen so quickly? And so it's just hard to keep pace with how quickly life moves when we have kids and they're growing up. Sometimes we exasperate our children because we're just tired. Just at the end of our rope, long day. Sometimes we exasperate them because we're broken ourselves. We were exasperated by our own parents. It's what we know. And we end up, if we haven't healed in those relationships, passing those same things on to the next generation. To be honest, I think oftentimes I exasperated my children, mostly because I was just selfish. Like, I want to do this because of what you're doing and the way that you're acting. You're requiring me to do that, and I'm annoyed, so you need to bear the wrath of my annoyance. I'm probably the only one who's ever done that. Maybe the only one who's willing to admit it in front of a crowd of people. I don't know. Oh, Steve, thank you. I got one brother in the house who gets it. Paul picks this, we looked at this last week. When he talks to husbands and wives, he says, wives, submit to, respect, revere, honor your husbands, not because they're always honorable, but because they're wounded, because they're broken at this place in their heart where they feel shame, because they feel incompetent, because they have fragile egos, and he's saying respect them so that they can learn and grow and become the people that God created them to be. Husbands, love your wives. He just one word: respect, revere, honor, submit to your husband. Wives, husbands, love your wives, because for many, to a greater extent, women have this sense of not being secure and knowing that they are lovely and loved and lovable. He picks one word, and he comes to parents. He picks one word: do not exasperate, do not provoke your children to anger. Because it's the most likely thing a father will do, and it has devastating results. Paul, in another of his letters to the church at Colossians, says this, same idea: fathers, do not embitter, do not exasperate, do not provoke your children. And he uses, or they will become discouraged. Discouraged. Discouraged from, you have to go back to Greek and Hebrew, right? This is from Latin. Courage, heart. Do not embitter your children, or they will lose heart. Lose heart. Solomon says in Proverbs, guard your heart, because it is the wellspring of life. It is the center of life. What do we know about the heart from what we've read already, right? The heart becomes the temple of God, the dwelling place of God, where he resides in us. What happens if that place becomes embittered? What happens if that place, if our hearts become hard? And it's the place where God meets with us, dwells within us. His residence is inside of us. We lose our hearts. How do we connect with God? How do we commune with him? The highest calling of a parent is to guard the heart of a child, because it's where he lives. It's where our life comes from. Lose heart, lose life. And I've literally watched it happen. I've watched a parent berate their child, and you can see the countenance of the child fall before your very eyes. And if only I'd seen other parents do that, but I've seen it in the face of my own children. It went too far for whatever reason, but it's never a good reason. So what to do? We're not to provoke them to anger, not to embitter. What to do? Paul says, bring them up with the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. Bring them up in the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. There are so many good things we want for our kids, right? We want an education for them. We want them to learn, because education opens up opportunities, helps them become the best version of themselves. So we take them to school and we help them with their homework until we can't help them anymore. We want them to have education. We want them to be well-balanced. And so we put them in sports programs and so they can learn teamwork and they can learn discipline and training and those kinds of things that help them become healthy, whole human beings. We want them to be, to learn music. So they take piano lessons or trumpet lessons or drum lessons, if you're one of those unfortunate souls who kids love to play the drums from the time that they're like at the kitchen table. Chris, I'm talking to you. Are you still awake over there? We want them to be whole. So we give all of our attention to so many areas of life. We want them to have opportunities that we didn't have. We bring them up in discipline and instruction and towards living their best lives so that they can show up. The snooty Mrs. Hatfield has always got the perfect kids looking down her nose at us, and we want our kids to behave and to look good so that everyone will know that we're good parents. I've heard this said more times than I can count, read it more times than I can remember, right? I'm going to let my children, I'm not going to teach them what to believe because I want them to come to their own decision about faith. You know what? There's a whole world out there who wants to teach our children what to believe. And they are not considerate of all about them coming to their own decision. They are committed to getting our children locked on their screens so they can have their attention 24/7 and sell their attention to advertisers. There's a whole world that wants to educate our children. Listen, don't leave that to chance. Bring them up with the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. Discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. Not that comes from our wisdom, not that comes from what the social media teaches them, not that comes from what their teachers do, not even that comes from what we want them to know. Instruction that comes from the Lord. If you've ever been through a counseling class, there's probably a good chance maybe or been through counseling that you've done a genogram. Anybody a genogram? Actually, I have a picture of one right here. It's like you map out a family tree, but then you annotate it with relationships. Good relationships, bad relationships. You can put in things like, ages that people die, addictions, broken relationships, black sheep children, good children, bad children. You map all this out, and if you do this enough generations, you can actually see the blessings of the parents being passed down from generation to generation, and the sins of the parents being passed down from generation to generation to generation if we're only giving them our instruction. Instruction from the Lord breaks the cycle of our own brokenness because we're not just giving them what we have, what we got, but what God has given us. In Deuteronomy, Paul's preparing the people of God to go into the promised land. And he's rehearsing the 10 Commandments. And as part of this conversation, he says this. He says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments that I give you are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your homes and on your gates." Love God, people. Love God. And teach your children to love God and press it upon their hearts. We're called to tend to our children's hearts. Think about this, right? If you held a child's heart in your hand, right? And it is right there for you to care for. How careful would we be in the way that we handle that heart? And it is. In the heart of a child is in the hand of their parents. Called to tend to their hearts. It's intricate. It's fragile. How do we impress them? Talk with them at home, on the road, when you go to bed, when you get up. Write it on the door to your houses, the gate to your yard. Post them on your hands, your foreheads. Will that not exasperate them? Right? If we start doing it, will that not exasperate them? It requires more than we have to offer. It requires wisdom that we don't have. It requires patience that we haven't yet developed. We need God in our own lives, in our own stories. We have to walk with God to give them what they need, not from us, but from Him, because they belong to Him. Eugene Peterson translates the verse in Ephesians this way. It says, "Fathers, don't exasperate your children by coming down hard on them. Take them by the hand and lead them. Take them by the hand and lead them in the way of the Master." This isn't a classroom lecture or a family meeting. We're called to take a journey with children, to walk alongside of them, to forbear, to forgive, to pray with, to live courageously, to sacrifice for them, to take a journey together, to do life together, to be careful with their hearts. At one point in our kids' lives, when our kids were young, and they're not young anymore, there was a point where I think Deb and I became particularly frustrated with their lack of appreciation for some of the things that their parents were offering them. And our attempts to communicate that to them were failing because they weren't changing and we were just getting frustrated. So Deb had this genius idea of taking the kids with an organization down to Tijuana. And you could do that then. I don't think you can do that anymore. I don't know. Probably can. Maybe we're just all afraid. Anyway, we took our kids down to Tijuana with this organization that took food and provided showers for people in the community. And our kids, our daughters were like helping little girls wash their hair and comb it and brush it. And sons were passing out food to the kids. And that experience, like in a day, had the effect of things that we had tried to been for weeks and months. Like, you know, you look back at in your life as a parent, if you are old, your kids are old now, it's like, you know, there was like 3 or 4 times like, yeah, we got that one right. How do we not just instruct them, but walk alongside of them? Because faith is caught as much as it is taught. Paul's family plan, children, parents, it all comes down to submit to one another. Care for one another in the ways that they need you to care for them, not the ways you want to. Because they belong to the Lord, as if for the Lord. Here's the plan. He's bringing everything together under the authority of Christ. And He's bringing marriages together, and He's bringing parents and children together. And next week we're going to talk about bosses and employees. And it's crazy because He always comes back to the same thing. And you're not doing life together based on what the person deserves from you. You're doing life together based on the fact that you and they belong to God, out of reverence for Christ. Lord, I pray that you continue to guide us on this path, to live according to the plan, mindful of the fact that we've been restored by grace to a communion with you that changes the story of our lives and then changes all of our relationships in the course of our lives. Christ, take up residence in our heart afresh and new by your Spirit. Fill us with all the measure of the fullness of God so we can live accordingly. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.